So here's a quick rundown of some of the tools that I use. There are different types of folders. This is the original bone folder. It's made out of, I think, cattle bone usually, and it's polished, and it's pretty useful for folding paper. The problem with this sometimes, it usually doesn't matter. For our purposes, it won't matter. Is it can shine. I don't know if you can see, it shines up the paper a little bit. These are made of Teflon. It's like a plastic folder, and they don't shine up the paper. So when you fold it, it kind of eliminates that issue. So you don't get that shiny edge anymore. Different sizes, different types. This is a nice one for folding large pieces of paper. This shape, and this is fine. If you just have this one, it's fine. Once you really get into it, you might want to try these. These are also nice for leather later on. You want to deboss leather. You can glue leather. When you glue the covers together, you put a raised piece of paper on the bookboard, and then you glue the leather over that. And like I said, this won't shine up the leather. This shines it up, the bone folder, but the Teflon folders don't. So you can use it for more delicate things like this. There's also the simple awl. These are used to punch holes through the signatures. This is like a jig that I made in order to punch holes through all of the signatures in one of the books that I'll show you. I like to use a piece of 1/2-inch foam core behind the signature, so when you punch holes in it, it's got somewhere to go. This is a self-healing cutting mat, and it makes it much easier to control the blade. It doesn't slip on these self-healing cutting mats, so you have a lot more control. You can go slower and press harder. This is an X-Acto knife with replaceable blades. One thing you want to do is replace their blade pretty often. They're not that expensive, and a dull blade can really screw it up. This is a utility knife that comes with replaceable blades. You're probably familiar with these. When the blade gets dull, you can just replace it like that. I use steel-edged. This actually has a hand protector, so you can't accidentally cut your hand. And it's also got a foam backing so that it holds the paper in place. I use these all the time when this grid, when I'm lining up the paper to cut perfectly square cut marks. What else? We have linen. This is an Irish linen thread. It's super strong, it's nice and thick, it's archival, and it comes in different thicknesses. And it depends on which needle you use. These are book needles. They're a little bit thicker. Some of the eye holes are small, some are large. You're gonna need a curved needle for this, and all you do is just bend it, and that's about as curved as you need. It's no big deal. This is a handy little, you can use a butter knife for this, but this is a handy little, relatively sharp, doesn't have to be that sharp knife, so that when you have a folded piece of paper, which I'll show you in a minute, you stick it in here and you run it along the edge, and you get a perfectly flat cut. And it's a lot easier than measuring with this. I think those are all the tools we're gonna need right now. What I'd like to do now is show you how to fold the entire piece of paper. This sheet I'm using is 22 inches by 30 inches. And I'm gonna use, this is my Teflon folder, but any bone folder will do. I'm gonna use 2 pieces of 22 inch by 30 inch 90 pound. This is a cold press watercolor paper. You line up the corners as best you can, and you simply keep your hand, put pressure on the corners that are lined up, and then go from the bottom up as you're creasing the fold with your folder. And if your hand is keeping the left, I'll do it again. If your hand is properly putting pressure down on the left side, you should be able to keep the fold in place so that you have 2 perfectly equal sides that you're going to end up with, so that you can keep reducing the page size. And then what I'm going to do next is take this knife. It's a flexible high carbon steel blade, but again, any butter knife will do. You put it in the corner and just slowly slide it up, and this way you don't have to deal with a steel-edged ruler and slippage, because that does, unless you're really kind of used to it and you do this many cuts. And if you don't have a guillotine cutter, which I don't have, a lot of book shops do have it, you'll get a perfectly square cut. And we'll just keep reducing that over and over again until we have the twice the size of the signature we want, because then we'll fold that and that will be our signature, and we'll stick one inside of the other. And with this 90 pound paper, which I'll show you in a few minutes, I believe it's best for the binding that we're doing to have 3 together, 3 sort of couched inside of each other. Too many and it's unwieldy, too few and it's inefficient, as well as the potential for ripping through the pages as your sewing increases. So again, we're slicing up through the page, and I'll just continue to do this until we have all the pages sliced. Now that we have the pages cut and folded to the right size, I believe this is about 7 inches. I'm not exactly sure what size you guys have, but if you have a 22 inch by 30 inch original piece of paper, you're going to end up with exactly, I got a little bit of schmutz on there. It's got that's the nice thing about using watercolor paper is you can, I'm not going to go too far with this because I don't really care right now, but you can buff it out with a blade. But so I've got 3 together. So there are 3 nested inside of each other, and you want to make sure the edges on the inside are all touching. There's 1 extra, and I'm going to use that extra piece. I think I have 5 signatures total with 3 in each. I'm going to use this last extra piece. I'm going to cut it so that it's like a tiny little signature. And this is going to be my jig that I'm going to use. I'm just going to make holes 1 inch apart so that when I poke holes through this at 1 inch intervals, about a 1/4 inch from each edge. This is going to be a little bit different from that one, but generally about like that. I will use it as a jig inside of each of those 5 signatures that I've created. And the holes, you do this so that you want the most, see how I'm using this 1 inch grid cutting mat to mark my 1 inch apart holes. Now I'm gonna take my awl. You can also do this with just a sewing needle. Just gonna do a light poke through each one of these, and this will be my jig from now on. One important step that I will show you in a minute so that each of these signatures doesn't get mixed up. Sometimes when you're sewing them together, you lose track of which one goes where because you're just kind of like concentrating on one thing at a time. I'm going to do a very light X on the upper left corner of each of these page signatures, including the jig I'm using, so that they will all always line up exactly correctly. So here's the first X, here's the second one, so you can see that, you can see it. They'll all line up perfectly. If they come out of order, I'll know exactly how to put them back in order, because if you're using this jig, it's not going to be super precise, but it will be extremely consistent if you're using it in the same spot for each signature. And if they come out of order, you'll know how to put them back in again, and it will line up again. It's a bummer when they don't line up because it can look kind of crappy. It's generally not a big structural issue. It should be just as strong, but it doesn't look as nice. It doesn't feel as nice. So now I'm going to take this jig, stick it inside the center of each of these signatures, and then use each hole that I've already created in this jig and poke holes through the back. What you really do have to be sure of while you're doing this is that the jig is exactly flush down, touching the bottom corner. The back corner of the jig is touching the inside fold of the signature, because if it's off a little bit, the hole will be off to the edge of the outside of the signature a little bit, and it will look crappy, and it won't line up as well, and it won't the mechanism of the closing and opening of the book won't work as well. It just, you want to try to get everything as generally precise as possible at this especially at this stage, because then you'll have more wiggle room later. So I'm flipping over each page. Even if I forget to flip over a signature after I've poked the jig, it's not a big deal, because I put that little X there that can easily be erased after I'm finished. The funny thing is, when I make my sketchbooks like this, I almost never remember to erase the X, but it doesn't matter because there's so much stuff going on in my sketchbooks, the X basically disappears. And if it doesn't, you can just erase it in 2 seconds. This should go pretty quickly. And the reason that foam core is behind it, it doesn't have to be 1/2 inch, it could be 1/4 inch, which is more common, is just so that it goes through the back page in the signature as much as the front page. Because if you're just doing straight on the cutting mat, the cutting mat doesn't absorb the tip of the awl at all. So it won't poke all the way through, and you need that hole. It just makes your life easier later. A lot of this stuff is just to make the job easier. See how nicely they line up there? All right, so now we can start sewing the pages together. And what you want to do, one thing I hadn't mentioned earlier is that block of yellow blob on the right, that little puck, is solid beeswax. And it's a nice, totally archival, and it doesn't, you want to wax, you basically want to coat your thread with this beeswax, because while you're sewing, as you take your hand away while you're sewing through the pages, it will help keep the thread in place everywhere else you've already sewn through the pages. So I'm going to take this and run it through the beeswax pucks a couple of times each direction. I probably overdo it a little bit, but it's better to have it fully waxed, so that no matter where you end up, you stop sewing for a minute. Sometimes you just want to take a break. Sometimes you leave it for a minute to tighten other areas. And sometimes you have to literally cut, like if you have a knot, you might want to have to cut it and then rejoin it somewhere else in the book, which I'll show you later on in this video, because even if you don't make a mistake, you can only use so much thread. You could use a gigantic long piece of thread for the whole thing. The problem with that is it will wear out at the edge at the bottom of the needle as you're pulling through, and it could break. And it also makes it really hard to sew a large book together. Now I'm just threading the needle through, but it can make it really hard to sew a really thick book together, because the needle will get twisted and knots will start to occur as you're sewing. So it's better just to do it. I generally do it one full arm's length. I'm 5 feet 9.5 tall. So my wingspan is about that large, and that's as much thread as I ever use. When I run out, I'll just cut it and reattach a whole new needle after that. This can be a little bit tricky. So here, this is actually an important part. Once I finally get it through the needle, you're gonna double back double the length of the needle. So pull it through the needle twice the length of the needle, and then poke the needle through wherever it is in the thread right there and pull it down. And I'll show you in a minute how it's done once I finally get it through. I'm trying not to stick my head too close to this so that the camera picks it up. And I think I got it here. It does help to coat the very edge of the thread if it's frizz a little bit, because then you can make it a little bit sharp to get it through the needle. So I've got it through. So now I've got it twice the length of the needle. And then I'll untwist the thread just enough to separate the 3 threads that make up the whole thread, and then poke it through. You'll see, untwist it a little bit, and then it pokes right through, and then hold the tip of the needle and then pull that down over the rest of it, and it'll stay, and it will really helps a lot to stay in place. One more safety wax. And so now the tricky thing about the Coptic stitch is the very first signature is different from all the rest. So the very first signature, you simply put it through the entire length of the page. So I'm going through the back, always start through the back, skip all the holes, and hold it nice and tight, not too tight. You never want to pull too tight or you'll rip it through the pages. A lot of this takes a little bit of experience in order to know how tight you want to keep it taut, but you don't want to rip it through the pages so taut that it rips through from one hole to the next. You can keep going if that happens. It's like, again, this is your first book. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to match up the X's. That X goes behind that X, and you're going to keep that in mind. So now the next thing you want to do is you're going to open, sorry, this is a little bit off. You're basically just sticking it through the hole in the back. There it is, of the next signature. So you pull it through like that. And now you're going to go to the next hole inside. It's just kind of a logical step. The next hole inside, and you're going to go back again through that first signature with that long thread that skipped all the other holes. I'm holding it so that they're both open. Both signatures, number 1 and 2, are both open. Sorry again for the camera work. It goes through the back, and you're going to catch that one long thread and go back again. So it's holding that thread tight. And again, this is the one that's different from all the rest. It gets easier after this one. And then go back again through this one and repeat the process until the end. So I'll show you again and again how to do this. So now keep it nice and tight, don't pull too tight. So now you can see it's caught onto that thread. It went right around it and back through again. And now you're going to go through the next hole, out, and back through again. And there we go, again and again. And it's looking pretty slick. So now you want to go around that one again and back through. And now to the next page, you just go back and forth until you're all the way to the end. And this is why we poke the holes in the beginning, because they're not too tiny that it's hard to get the needle through once the thread is already through. And it's not too wide, it's not too big either that it'll rattle around once the thread is in there. You want it to be just about twice the diameter of the needle each hole, which is why we use that awl. But that's not super important, just so long as you have the hole that's through all three pages in each signature. Make sure you go around. You don't want to miss that. If you miss that, you'll have to go back again and start that stitch again. You got to make sure they're all catching there. At this point, if you need to, and I believe I will do it in a second, you can pull that one long thread through the first signature a little bit tighter. Oh, this is another important thing. Once the needle gets twisted, you want to hang it down and run your finger along it to untwist it. Because if it gets twisted, especially later on, when you start to sew it through these and it gets real tight, it will twist while you're tightening it and it can cause a knot. And while beeswax is great for sewing books because it's helping to hold that thread in place, it's terrible for knots because it sort of sticks them together and it's really hard to undo it. But the key to this whole process is take your time. Be patient. Even if you think you know what you're doing, it's really easy to screw this up and cause a little bit of a knot. And it can be undone. And I'll show you later on again. So you hold that tight a little bit. I'll show you how to, if you screw something up and you need to cut the thread after you've sewn signatures together, there is a way to get them back onto one long piece of thread again. You just sort of cut it and tie it together in between the signatures. So here you go, through there again. This could have been fast forwarded, but sometimes it helps to see it again and again in case you kind of forget where you are or what you're doing. It is pretty meditative once you do a few of these, and it is super satisfying once you're finished with the whole thing. It's this nice solid little thing that's together and it's not loose. Sorry again, I got about the crappy. There we go. Back through. All right, so pretty soon we're going to start getting the rhythm down, because we're going to put the rest of the signatures on after this one, and it will be so the very end of this one, you're gonna once both of these threads are outside, you're just gonna tie these together in a nice square knot. Pretty simple. One and one more. Once you gain a little experience doing this, you'll sort of find, oh, I don't need more. I want a different knot or whatever. You can do whatever you want. I actually, for my sketchbooks, okay, now we're going to put these signatures together, and we're going to, again, line up the X's, one behind the next. Make sure you're going down one direction. You don't want to start going different directions and put the signature on top of the book. You're going to keep adding toward the bottom. So now the next one after that knot, you're just going to go straight through the back. This is where it gets simple. Out again, and now we're going to hook. This is why the needle is curved. We're going to hook around that stitch in the back. I'll show you a close-up here. Hook it around and always go the same direction, because it'll form a nice pattern in the end. And there you go. Hook it around there, or there I go, and back through again, and you just do that over and over and over again, back and forth. This is the easy part. Pull it a little bit tight, but not too tight, so it doesn't pull through. One of the reasons we're using 90-pound paper is that if the paper's thin, it can much more easily rip through while you're sewing. So for these beginning books, it's easier to use a slightly thicker paper. The other nice thing about this phase is you don't have to have two signatures opened up. You just have that one signature opened. Notice how I moved my hand that I'm holding it to the other side. You can hold whatever side you want, whatever's most comfortable for you, but you want to make sure they're kind of held tight together while you're doing this. Some people like to actually clip the signatures together with like an office paper clip that like legal documents have, or whatever holds the paper together. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can just hold it with your hand, and then you have more control over it. Back and forth. So this is the easy part. Back through and around and through again. This is where the rhythm comes in. And you can do this as much as you want with this. You can do 100 signatures and make the book thicker than it is wide if you want. You just keep going at this point. It doesn't really matter. We're just doing 2 pages, 2 large 22 by 30 inch pages for now, for your first book. And you can, again, improvise later. So the last one, you're just going to go around this one and do a little square knot, and then poke it through that loop at the end, and then pull it tight. And then you're ready for your next one. And you just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now you're going to go the other direction. XX, page on the bottom, or signature on the bottom. Open that one signature up, and then go back the other way, and continue to do this throughout the whole rest of your pages. Okay, so now what we want to concentrate on is the lengthening the thread for reasons that it could either be because you want to make a lot more signatures and you couldn't possibly use one long piece of thread long enough, or it could be because you have a knot and you need to cut the thread at one point, otherwise, and then go back a little bit. So what I like to do is in the middle of the signature, I'm doing this so that it kind of lines up in the center of the book. You make sure you have at least 3 inches of thread. If not, you'll have to keep backtracking so that you have 3 inches, 2 minimum, but I would say 3 really minimum inches of thread to make your life easier. You start a whole brand new piece of thread. You get the needle threaded. So you're basically starting with a brand new threaded needle. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries. Hopefully I get it this time. Let's see. Once you get wax on the very edge of it and you pinch it together, it should stay together. If it starts to fray, it gets really hard to get it through the needle. So there we go. Remember, pull it twice the size of the needle, untwist the thread just to the point where they separate a little bit, and then stick it through somewhere in there. Doesn't have to be super precise, and pull it down so it stays secure. And then do one more quick little wax there, or don't. Okay, so now you're gonna use the other end of the thread and you're gonna tie a knot, twist them together and just tie a square knot there. Right there, sort of twist them together. I like to start the knot with the loop because it can get confusing. It's too short here. It should be longer. I screwed up something and I had to skip the video ahead so that I should have pulled it out a little bit. But this can happen. I mean, it's good for you to see this. So the thread's a little short, so it gets tricky. So you make your little hole. Basically, just tie these together, whatever way you can. But I like to do a square knot, and I do a loop and I pull it through with the awl so that I can get it through the hole there. And it can get a little tricky. Again, it's much easier if you have a longer thread to begin with. So there you go. So another thing you want to make sure is the knot that you tie tight isn't going to go beyond the next hole. There I got a little too close for my comfort. But now we can continue to, you can continue to sew the signature on and just keep going with your last one the same way you were doing the rest of them. And you see no difference in the back. And you continue with this. It looks like a braided pattern. It's really nice looking if you keep going the same direction. Each time you pass through each signature. So we're coming up at the end here, and what you want to do is secure the very last one in a similar knot to what you've been doing. And what I like to do, so we're going through this and we're going not all the way, and then we're going to poke it through that little hole there, pull it tight. And then I like to tie a tiny little knot at the edge there just for safety so that it doesn't ever come undone. And so I'm going to do another little square knot here. I think that's called a square knot. And then in order to keep it down, you pull it. As you're pulling it, you put the needle through and flush against the edge of the book, and you can get it much closer to the end. So you're going to cut it there, And then same with the last one. And then I put a tiny dab of PVA. It doesn't even matter what kind of glue you use, almost, because you don't need it to be necessarily flexible like you do with most books. Use a tiny, tiny little dab of glue there just to make the knot really hard to ever come undone. And let that dry, and that's it for now. That's pretty much all you need to do. You can put a cover on this book by folding it like you used to do with your grade school books. You remember when they let you borrow a book and then you took a grocery bag, maybe I'm just showing my age, and then you folded it so that it was the cover of the book. But this is a nice, strong, solid book, and the back looks really nice, and it's a great beginning book.